What's happening? What's happening? And what's happening? Welcome to another episode of the African American Folklorist, but more importantly, the African American Folklorist of the Month, where we center the scholars, practitioners, and truth bearers preserving, conserving the depth and brilliance of Black traditional knowledge. Don't even worry who I am. Today we celebrate our June African American Folklorist of the Month, Dr. Elisha Oliver. Dr. Oliver is more than a folklorist. She's a biocultural anthropologist, a community grounded visual ethnographer, and a deep thinker whose work lives at the intersection of Black health, food systems, spatial memory, and storytelling. She currently serves as executive director of Texas Folklife, but her path winds through decades of nonprofit leadership, art making, and transformative fieldwork. Born in Oklahoma and raised in Texas, Dr. Oliver draws her roots or draws on her roots to examine how Black communities navigate land, healing, and cultural continuity. Oh, this is going to be a great conversation, y'all. Her scholarship, shaped by both academic rigor and lived tradition, examines birth outcomes, environmental health, and the healing narratives embedded in our stories, songs, and kitchens. As a Zora Neale Hurston Award recipient and Wenner Grin, I hope I said that right, Public Scholar Fellow, she is committed to building bridges between institutions and communities. Her art, photography, pottery, film breathes. Is that a word? Breathes. There you go. Life into the archive. And her leadership reflects the value of servant scholarship, lifting up her team, her people, and the cultural frameworks that shape how we live and remember. Oh, come on now. We're talking to Dr. Oliver. We are talking to Dr. Oliver. How are you, Dr. Oliver?
I am well. I am well. It's an honor to be here and to sit with you. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. I feel like I need to every time I need to walk into a room, I need to have your booming voice to introduce me. But yeah, it's very humbling, and I'm blessed. I'm pleased to be here and sit with you, good folk, today.
Yeah, I kind of laughed to myself because I thought of recently I reintroduced I'm gonna get you sucker to my daughter. So Denise and I watched it with her, and when he said, every good hero has theme music, that's what I was thinking when you said that. I dig it. I dig it. So there's a lot to unpack, right? Um, I think before I get to any academic or scholarly questions, or even questions as it pertains to Black experiences, how did you find biocultural anthropology and folklore? Or how did it
Mm,
find you?
very good question. And there my path was not it was not linear, just like storytelling. It was not a linear path. Um, I kind of stumbled into biocultural anthropology and folklore. I was about to be an empty nester, and I had been spent years as a public school educator. And honestly, I was tired of teaching a standardized test to students. I mean, you're just
Mm,
teaching the test, and that was not true learning. And as many of us know, and I should say these are my own thoughts, not the thoughts that represent anyone else, but as many of us know, standardized tests, they can they're not weighted fairly, should I say.
right.
And some of our students and I say our students, they have different lived experiences. And so I started taking some additional classes just to kind of see what was out there, see what would spark my interest as a soon to be empty nester. My daughter was graduating from high school, going to go off to college, and I took a class in human geography.
Mm.
And that kind of sparked my interest. And I, was going on these different trips and going to these different communities. And I asked my professor, I was like, what, I am reinventing myself, so to speak. And what advice can you give me? And he said, well, from um, your interest in what I see in class, he said, have you explored anthropology? And I was like, well, no. What is anthropology? Now, mind you, I had been taking other courses and was really into African American literature. And I tell people Zora is my girl. Like, that's my girl. And so I had read Their Eyes Were Watching God. But at the time, I was just seeing her as someone that was in this literary world. But then when I started to explore anthropology, I was like, well, she was one of the first.
That's right.
Not only was she an anthropologist, but she was a folklorist. And she was doing things at a time when folks that did not look like her, did not look like me, they didn't have those opportunities. And so that was my entryway. And I started to think about the communities that I had grown up in Dallas, some of those rural communities in Oklahoma, where our people did not have access to healthcare, didn't have access, or were in food deserts. And so, as my anthropology passion started to develop, I started to look at, those things that were more on the biological side, looking at health disparities in our communities, looking at, the food systems that were available to us, things like transportation. And so that led to that biological part, but there was still thinking about what Zora had done. And I call her Zora like we are, like she's right there, like we're buddies, like we're besties. But I started to think about that in the ways in which she told stories, told stories for us, and it was for us and by us, in the way that she did that, and she captured that in such a way. And so that's where that folklore started to come in, and knowing that I'm saying we, the collective we are a people of thick description, multi-layered. And so that spoke to me as well. And I was like, well, I can still do anthropology and I can do this folklore as well, and just blend the two, because what I'm doing is, yes, I'm looking at health disparities, or I'm looking at the ways in which space contributes to, positive health outcomes, but I'm also interested in the stories of different communities, the stories of folks that look like me, and bringing in these other elements. And so that just kind of moved me along through, this reinvention or rebirth. I call it my personal renaissance, um, you know, and that's how I ended up here.
Well, I mean, I love it, and first and foremost, what I received from it was intentionality. It was even though it may have seemed, well, I stumbled into it, but your stumbling was because of an intentional thought of dealing with something specific to, and everyone knows this at this point. I'm trying to find another word other than community, because
Mhm.
it's become ambiguous. It's used so much, but based on our community and how the treatment, right?
Yes.
Um, I you may you mentioned so many things, and we're going to get back to Zora and all of these things, but food desert kind of really sticks out to me uh, when it comes to your scholarship. Thinking about Black health food systems, landscape, and returning to land, right? Talk, I guess, walk us through how you connected food desert to your work as your work.
It was interesting. I was my first kind of entree into like doing field work was looking at an unhoused community. I say an unhoused community and this population. And I was spending some time in this area, in this particular part of the southern sector of Dallas. And I was thinking that, there's, okay, we might have a liquor store, and we may have a pawn shop, but where are these folks getting their food? And I'm like, this is one of the areas that there's a high influx of income. The economy happens, yearly with football games and the state fair. And I'm like, but there are no grocery stores. There's a
Mhm.
couple of fast food places, um, but there are no grocery stores. And this was an area that was at one point in time very rich, culturally rich, where folks had their mom and pop restaurants. They had the grocery stores that sold healthy foods. There were community gardens, and people were having access because there was this process of um, sharing and being able to, if you didn't have something, you can go down the street and your neighbor may have grown some greens. And so I began to look at the absence of just, healthy food options, but then just food options altogether. And I was like, well, if I'm seeing this in this community, is it specific to a certain demographic? And
Mhm.
what does this look like? And the questions for me were, as a people, as a collective, um, what has happened that has that's caused this kind of erasure, where there are no healthy foods, there are no grocery stores in the area, and if you're familiar with redlining, they put a highway there in, and I'm like, some of the people that are still there, they don't have cars, and even getting public transportation can be an issue to go to the grocery store. And so I started looking at, what does it look like for folks, a collective, to come up with some creative ways to like remedy this absence of, just food in general in the area. And what does that mean? Like this return to land. And his name escapes me, but I saw a segment of this guy that was in California doing guerrilla gardening.
Mhm.
And I thought, you know what? What if there was a return to the land where we're cultivating our own foods, and then we're having some educational elements to talk about what this means for health? And so started to explore these other areas, and just doing this kind of broad search of what other communities, and I'm saying communities, but what other groups that were kind of having this return to the land, so to speak. And for me, I was looking at it as like there's this, health and access to healthy foods. And for me, I should say specifically, my research was looking at healthy mamas and healthy babies and
Mhm.
what that meant. And for a mom to not have, um, proper nutrition and what that meant for the development of her child in utero. And so I began to explore all of these elements and that food in the food systems. And the return to land was a large part of that exploration.
Wow. So I want to really dive into that. However, your explanation evoked a question because you're the executive director of Texas Folklife,
Yes.
right? So, and I've had the honor and pleasure to do some works with you in the organization, man, for a couple of years now, right?
Mhm. Yes, yes.
Wow. Um, what you described to me makes me want to ask you: do those works kind of prepare you to deal with the plethora of marginalized folk that you give a platform to?
It set the stage for what I do now, and being able to, move into these, and I say move into these communities, to work with folks from across the state of Texas, And even in some of our neighboring states, it has provided a foundation to, for me personally, to say and to work with my team and say, this is, this is much larger than Texas folk life. It's much larger than ourselves. And let's let's not be the authority on programming or initiatives, and let's work with the community in partnership, in collaboration. One of the one of the programs that we have is this community folk scholar program, this community folk fellow. And the time in the field as an anthropologist, as a folklorist, prepared me for the role that I have now as an executive director, and saying, this is the ways in which we can shape or reshape our programs and train these community folk scholars. So, when I look at my time in the field and working with these different cultural groups, and knowing that, in my role now as the ED, that I am faced with a variety of folks in diverse communities with different cultural backgrounds, and it has helped prepare me to move in and out of these spaces.
That's a perfect segue, right? Because I told you we were getting back to the Honorable Zora Neale Hurston, right? So in the vein of Zora Neale Hurston, walk us through being a woman, a Black woman in the field navigating these spaces.
You know, um, when I think about Zora, and I already mentioned it, she is like my person. That is my girl. When I think about her and how brave she was, um, I draw on that spirit. I look at the time when she was in the field, the time when she was working under Franz Boas, what I call Big Papa, when she was pushing back against, um, what would be considered societal norms. In many ways, she was owning who she was unapologetically. Right, that is, something that I've had to grow into, because you receive a certain amount of training, or discipline specific training at university. And it was like, well, if you're going to do this, then you have to fit into this box. And I'm like, well, that I don't fit into that box. um but I know that I have to go along in many ways, but I need to make what I'm doing my own. And for me, like I said, I've had to grow into that. But I draw on her work in many ways because, uh, I'm like, she was fearless.
Right.
And, you know, um, even going to work in some communities where she looked like the people that she was working with as a woman, and as a woman at that time, there were still some standards there. Um, but I said that she had such a presence in a rapport with people that they opened up. And so when I am in the field and I'm moving in and out of spaces, I think about the work that she did. And I'm drawing on her as one of these, kind of the foremothers, that set the ground for folklore, that set the ground for anthropology, even though she may not have, received her right and justice due, in the field. And for me, I think that now, fast forward, and here we are, 2025, and it's times have changed. And and I will leave it there. But as a woman in my position, whether I am doing research in communities that, you know, may not want me there, or whether I'm doing in community research in communities where I know that I am going to be embraced. um, I think, how am I quickly going to how am I going to develop the rapport that I need?
Right.
And, what does that look like? And I think for me, coming with, just like, this is who I am, unapologetically, and just having these conversations, starting with the conversation, taking off that researcher hat, taking off that folklorist hat, and it's like, tell me who you are, you
Hmm.
know, recognizing that humanity in everyone, no matter who we phenotypically look like, or what our income bracket may be, or whether we're urban or rural or otherwise, and then saying, let's sit down and break bread and have a conversation. And for me, that has been, um, the strength of being a woman in the field. Even during times of uncertainty. But then again, I reflect back um, you know, on Zora Neale. I think about, some of the other folklorists that have gone forward, past and present, and that
Mhm.
continue to do the work and continue to build relationships and just share stories.
So, what I would like for you to do for us, for audience members who may not know, describe to us, or give us the definition, or even your personal definition of what a biocultural anthropologist actually is. Because I'm making an assumption that people know, and
No, and I get that all the time. I do. And they were like, well, first of all, what is anthropology? And you're saying biocultural anthropology. And I'm like, well, what do you think? Let's start with, what do you think anthropology is? And
Mm.
they were like, well, that's a good question. Is it Indiana Jones? I'm like, well, not exactly. But I'm like, I have been trained in the four subdisciplines, so I could probably go out and do some lay archaeology, but no. And I tell them, when you think about um, humanity. And now the discipline is so expanded with all of the subdisciplines. But I'm like, you're studying, or it's the study of folk, people. And this is my lay interpretation. And I said, and that can encompass food, that can encompass health, that can encompass the ways in which they tell stories, or a certain dress, or even music, religion. I said, so it's this culmination of things. Um, in my studies, I specialized in two tracks: the biological, which we call health and human biology, and then sociocultural. And again, thinking about, what I was seeing in my first set of anthropology classes, and being out in that population and knowing that, hey, I want to give back. For me, it's like, I want to make a change. Like, this is an area that I grew up, and I was about to give my age by referencing a time frame, but in the 70s. I'll just say very generic. When I grew up in the 70s, and I'm in the back of my parents' car, and we're riding through these areas, I recall the time when it was so vibrant, and people appeared so healthy, and not only healthy, physically healthy, but socially healthy, economically healthy. And so then coming back, to this area as an adult with some anthropological training, and realizing a lot has changed, and people aren't healthy, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. And so, thinking about my time at the University of OU, hey, Langston, I'm talking to Wilkins, but we have that little UT OU tension, friendly tension there. But no, thinking about the biological training that I received at OU, and the ways in which we're looking at, different health disparities. And for me, it was focusing on those health disparities. As I mentioned, I wanted, healthy mamas and babies. And that was my focus, because when I was looking at the southern sector, and I was like working with, those folks that were unhoused, there were many women that did not have access to maternal health care.
Mhm.
And so for me, drawing on the classes that I took, where it was, there's a lot of theory there, but then there are some more practical things as well. So that was the biological side of that. And then the sociocultural side, always been one that is really interested in the ways in which people use their space, or space and place, in the ways in which they identify it. For me, it's been, on the front porch. And for me, that has been an element in my work, like, sitting on the front porch at your big mama's house, or your grandma's house, or somebody, your auntie's house, And the way that front porch was utilized as a teaching space, as a healing space, as a space of correction. And so that became a part of my work as well. And like, well, I'm looking at health in this biological sense, but I'm also looking at the ways in which women have used space, whether it's at the kitchen table, because the kitchen can be a place to feed you. It can be a place to, get your hair done. It was a whole host of things for people. And so begin to intertwine those and study the second track as well, because I said I can't separate the two. I want healthy people, and how are they using that space? How are they telling those stories in that space? And so that kind of blended the two. So, culturally, thinking about things like space, thinking about language, um, the ways in which people talk about certain things, code switching, all of those things kept factored into that cultural element, and the ways in which music was very much a part of life, and then again blending that biological to say, okay, this group of folks, we have these health disparities, but why, and what can we do about it? And so just kind of blending those two.
So, well, because what you kind of just described leads to this wasn't my next question, but it's going to be now. You have a project, I believe it's The Land as Medicine.
Mm-hmm. The land is medicine.
Because what that's kind of what and it's just ironic, from the porch to the garden to all these things. And talk to us about that project. And I guess in talking about it, you'll let us know how pretty much encompasses everything you just said.
So, thinking about the land as medicine, that project, um, again, when you're involved and you're so deep into the field, many things, many things emerge. And again, thinking about space and place, thinking about, these kitchen spaces, and, going back to these rural communities in Oklahoma, because that's where, one of the things that came about was this use of land, and the ways in which I seen that there was this, um, you know, kind of synergistic communication that was going on between the American Indian community that I was working with, the Mexican American community, and the African American community. And this is in a neighborhood that has historically been an African American neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But watching the ways in which, and I call these women the mothers of the community, how they were taking it upon themselves to teach about the things that they were growing in their gardens, and how there were certain medicinal properties in those, they were foraging and teaching those who would listen, that there's some medicinal properties to this plant, and this is the way that we've used it historically. And when you don't have access to health care, this is one of the ways that you can take some ownership in your own health. um, you become your own agent, so to speak, in your health care. And so as that was as I was observing that, and, I would see, women go over for a variety of reasons to one of the elder mothers in the community to say, hey, do you have a tea for this? Or is there something that I can use in the garden to, to take care of this ailment? And watching that teaching process happen, and knowing that that was not something new, that was something ancestral, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing that carried through, I was like, well, the land is medicine. But then there was so much more to that too, as I started to peel back those layers. Like this was, at one point in time, what we would call a historically Black community. And there was a lot of ownership that was there. And so just by taking up space, that was medicinal in a very different way, and so thinking about what that looked like, and was starting to again pull those layers back and tease different things out to say, well, the land is being used as kind of in this reclaiming of ownership of one's sense of being, but it's also being used in a very real way to treat a variety of illnesses, whether they are physical illnesses, or those things that are more maybe social as well, in knowing that this become a kind of a form of informal medicine.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I was like, well, the land is very powerful in the ways in which it's being used.
So let me ask you this question, which possibly may lead to the question I really wanted to ask next, but for whatever reason, the last parts of your statements evoke a different question, which is good. Um, for those who may not uh, see the connection of what we're saying being significant to Black narrative, or what I call blues people narrative, right? Could you lay that out for us? Why is this important to Black folk? How does this relate to us and now? And us meaning um, those that are not in mine in your spaces.
Mm-hmm. You know, and this is a really, I appreciate this question because there's a conversation that I was having earlier about where we find ourselves. And I'm using this we as a collective we, our folks, um, during this time frame. I am I am as old school as they come. So again, like what I say, these are my opinions, but we find ourselves in a time where I feel that we either have been removed forcefully, and I use forcefully broadly, where we have been spoon fed some things that are not um, our own teachings, so to speak, and we've forgotten our sense of space and place. Um, for this connection to to the blues people, and we're all blues people, to the blues people, this connection to the blues people where we are. I think that those of us who are not in our spaces, mine and your spaces, um, we haven't always had the same opportunities. And again, thinking about like this, what I'm calling this forceful removal from the land, and I'm using land as a broad term as well, where these obstacles have um, been placed in our way, that some of us have not had the time to sit back and think, okay, this is where I come from, or these are where my people come from, the blues people. And this is what I carry within in my DNA. They have not been afforded that time, that luxury to sit back and ruminate over these things, because there's all of these competing agendas, and they're layering on to an agenda that may not be their own. And so when I think about like this connection to who we are as a people, I'm thinking that we have to go back 7 generations, and I'm borrowing from my American Indian folks, that we have to go back these 7 generations to really get at an understanding of who we are. I think it's and some people will disagree with me, but I think it's a responsibility for um, what I'm calling the new elders, which would be me, to impart this knowledge, to share this knowledge, to say this is who we are as a people. And it doesn't have to look like we looked 50 years ago, but this is who we are, and this is the connection to that. And there is a sense of pride in, you know, coming from and being a part of the blues people. It's cellular. It's not something that we can that we can get rid of, whether we want to or not. And I think for me, when I think about that connection of being in this space that I have the privilege of being in, that I feel like I have a duty to those that are coming behind me to say, this is what this has been my experience. You have your own experience. This is the experience of our forefathers and our foremothers. But you can see that there's this line that is a continuous line that exists. There's like this bloodline that exists. And this is how we can continue to evolve, how we can continue to grow, how we can lay the foundation for others, because there's just this invisible umbilical cord that ties us to one another.
So I love that answer. It just so happens it evoked another question that, and I have the textbook laying here. Why I don't know, because I wanted to ask you about the field versus academic versus public folklore and everything. But before we get to that, are you familiar with Nathaniel Norman's African American Studies text, The Discipline and Its Dimensions?
No, I don't think I am.
Okay,
Look at there.
I pulled it up because folklore is not in the book, but anthropology, sociology, and things of this nature is in the book. And I think your answer to the question uh, of relating to, I guess, the people on the ground takes my next question about field versus academic and public, even more specific to Nathaniel Norman's ideology that Black folk are supposed to. You know who else said this? David Banner,
Mm,
the rapper. He said, he said,
mm-hmm.
um, folks is mad because Black folk in Mississippi in the South went and got educations and never came back.
Yes.
So now, Nathaniel, his ideology, we are to go become experts in these fields, political science, sociology, anthropology, and then come back and be an applied scholar,
Mm, mm-hmm.
right? So now with that framing, talk to us about the field versus academic, public folklore and anthropology versus I guess you could say I don't want to say, I'll say university, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And this is an important question. It is a question with a lot of history and a lot of weight, because one, in my earliest days and still now, I have called myself an applied anthropologist, a public folklorist, and I was told, you don't say that. You know, if you're in the academy, that is not something that you say, because you're pushing theory. You are um, looking at theory in a different way. But I said, for me, the type of work that I'm doing, I want to give back, and it's applied. I don't want to. I enjoy teaching. I do. I love my students. I love seeing that light bulb come on. I love sharing, different bodies of work. I love, helping shape critical thinking. But for me, I'm like, I don't just want to sit in the ivory tower and write a bunch of books and read. I mean, I thought initially, that's a good little gig. You get to read all day, you can write all day, you can teach 2 classes. But I have since learned, I have become learned, that that's not really how it works, right? So a large part of this, goes back to, hey, I want to be able to give back. I want to inspire. I want to bring about change. I want to get in good trouble. Um, you know, and so I'm an applied anthropologist. I'm a public folklorist because I want to bring about good. I want to use my training to help somebody else to build up, to help build up and not tear down on people. I don't just want to sit there and write about it. And so there's this tension that exists, like either you're out doing something or you're writing about it. And I figured, well, you can do both. You can be an applied scholar You can be someone that writes about what you're doing, but you can do it in such a way that it is equitable to the folks that you're working with. And so that has been, my pushback, and because I heard that you don't want to call yourself applied because people won't take you seriously, and that is the conversation that's still happening. But you see that there's a move away from these kind of old notions of doing anthropology or what a folklorist should look like and be like and sound like, and there is more of what can we do with the training that we have. um, there's an old trope that anthropology was considered the handmaiden of colonialism at one point in time because, we were going into these communities and we were studying folk, and then we were bringing back that information and we were writing this beautiful paper that would get tenure or additional research dollars. But now there's been a move away from that where people are saying, going out and doing this work, um, creating a new public health initiative for people, or coming up when working with an NGO to make sure that people have, sanitized water, or whatever that looks like. The land is not being polluted with runoff from different industries. That's applied work. And so now it's not so taboo to say that, I'm an applied anthropologist. Yes, I'm a biocultural anthropologist, but I'm an applied anthropologist. Or yes, I'm a folklorist or a visual ethnographer, but I am not just writing about it. I'm using that knowledge, giving what I have back to those folks, and co-creating something with that community. It's not just about me. And so there's that pushback that happens, but that's a weighty question. And that is one that I am certain that won't go away anytime soon. But I do see the slow shift happening, that those of us, and I'm saying us in this academic sphere, that we're not only talking about it, we're being about it. So we're doing the work, and we're doing so um unapologetically and with
Mhm.
pride. And I like to see that, because I've heard those, oh, don't say you're an applied person, because that's not, well, I am, you know
Well, I'm going to add a tad bit more weight to the question. Because you set it up perfectly with the idea that anthropology and folklore, as we know it in its early days, was of the colonial minds, right?
Mhm.
Well, let me be very specific. Western
There you go.
folklore and anthropology. So to the second part of that question is uh, the idea of applied not being taken seriously, because just for context, biocultural is scientific at its root in Western academia. So, do you think the reason some of these things were said or shared with you, as in don't use applied, because that was more of a Western ideology of scholarship? And because to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, I always want to either be corrected or taught. So I don't know anything. The idea of applied and memory seems to come from Black scholarship. So do you think that's where the I don't say conflict, but I would more political term the challenge of two different scholarly ideologies?
And I love the way you frame that. Yes, absolutely. I do think that, and I think for many reasons, because I've had several different folks, that would say, well, don't say that if you want to be able to move in these spaces, on the more scientific realm. Don't say that you're applied, even though what you may be doing is applied work. Just don't say it. But you're right. I think that is like this Western ideological framework that somebody created to say that um, you're not doing serious work, or your research is not rigorous. That's the term that, I've been told. Is your research rigorous? Because it sounds like you're just capturing stories.
Wow.
Well, how do you define rigor? And you know, so there's these different definitions. But I do think that there's, again, and this is a weighty area, because I think for many of us who do the applied work, we come with a set of lived experiences that have helped shape the ways in which we decide how we're going to enter the field, interact in the field, be a part of that field, be both, participant, observer, return to the field. Um, and I do think that those of us in these Western schools of thought, using this collective we and us again, that, we kind of fall into these systems where um, sometimes it feels like we have to make a choice. Are we going to do something with our scholarship? Have we become so learned that we move away from our roots and, what has been shared and taught to us? And, for some of us, or for some folks, I'm not including myself in this group, but for some folks, they believe that it's not their responsibility to go back into the community to teach others.
Hmm.
And I've heard that. I've heard that, well, I got mine and they can get theirs. But I'm like, but you got yours on the back and shoulders of somebody else.
Right.
So do you not feel like, to some degree, that you should open up that door or pull somebody else up? And I always get, and I'm talking to a good friend of mine, and they're like, well, we both come from the same set of lived experiences, and nobody did that for us. And I'm like, but that's not true.
Hmm.
I'm like, we have, we put that veil on, and we have forgotten, because there's been somebody at some point in our lives have said, you know what, maybe don't do that, or you should do this. And, that's the kind of thing, like, for those of us that are still in the academy, I feel like it's our responsibility to say, you don't have to conform to this Western school of thought, so to speak. And I'm just saying that broadly, but that you can, if you want to go out and you want to, you know, talk about music in the community and help folks put together their stories and songs, you're still able to do that and still be scholarly. That's
Hmm.
an applied approach, and you're still able to do that. If you want to capture the dialect as it is spoken, like referencing my girl Zora, that's still scholarly, and you can do that. So I think that for some folks who have been trained in certain disciplines, that, that's one of the things that we wrestle with. Like, how well is it going to be received by my peers?
Right. Right. Rather than our people. Let me ask you to define and then explain your experience as a visual ethnographer.
Mm. So I have always been fond of photography. Um, from my earliest days of seeing or finding beauty in just the common everyday. And I was looking, in my earliest studies of anthropology, I was looking for a way to capture what I was seeing. And I watched, there was a film, and it was called Born into Brothels. And there was a filmmaker, and it was one of the films that we use like in the early learnings of anthropology, and the way that she was telling that story. And I was like, this is really, it's captivating. Um, and again, I was looking at it through the lens that she was sharing, but then there was a part where she was giving the community, these kids in the community cameras, these
Hmm.
disposable cameras, to shoot their own stories, to capture their lived experiences. And it was kind of this co-creation, and that stuck with me. And I was like, well, these children are telling their stories about being children of these mothers that work in these brothels in India, and she's telling another story, and I'm looking at these stories converge. And so as I started to think about my own work, not I didn't want to sensationalize the populations that I was working with, but I knew that I could write about something. And we talk about thick descriptions and things being thick with description, but that it wouldn't capture that. And it wouldn't, for me, I'm thinking, okay, and I'm just still working with this unhoused population. Like, what do we do to change the circumstances there? How do we, how can we make, public transportation more accessible to these folks that it's there, but they can't get on because they don't have the money to do so. Or you have somebody that's living in this car wash because they don't have access to mental health care and they're veterans. And
Hmm.
how can I capture that in a way that is very respectful, that doesn't sensationalize what I'm seeing, but that it tells a story that my words can't convey? And I started talking to my advisors and different mentors about ways to do that, to think that is this ethical? Because at first I was like, well, I like photography and I think there's beauty in all things. And I want to share the story, but I want to do it ethically. Um, and I want to make sure that I am being respectful of the folks that I'm working with and having that conversation with them beforehand and saying, this is who I am. But I'm also a photographer, I'm this artist, and I want to capture your experience. And am I able to do that? And having those conversations and thinking about being in these communities, creating this ethnography, this written piece, but also bringing in some of these visual elements of as well, to say this is this community, um, and telling that story visually. Because some folks, they're not going to want to read a 200-page paper or whatever that may be, but they can see these photos that really get at the lived experiences of these individuals. And so that was my kind of my blending of this visual ethnography into doing community folklore, public folklore, um, and anthropology, to say there's more layers to this story than you're going to read about. And these photos capture that, or capture the experiences of the people in this community, or maybe some of the things that these kind of adversarial elements that they face. And it just has become a part of what I do. But never, I'm always mindful. I don't want to put anyone at risk. And I want to be very respectful and very mindful, because these are the lives of others. I want to make sure that everything that I do is ethical. And to say, hey, these are the photos that I've taken. What do you think about this? And having that conversation after the fact, like, is this appropriate? And you tell me, because if it's not appropriate, we will delete it. And this was I was using film then, but it's saying we can scrap it. But it's become a part of who I am, a part of who I am as a folklorist, as a storyteller, as an artist, to be able to shape these narratives in a very visual way.
I dig it. I dig it. I have to ask one last question, because if I don't ask this question now, I will ask you five more. And something you said, so I always ask everyone, what piece of advice and things of this nature, but um, the conversation you had with a friend, and what you shared about some folk don't believe they need to go back and things of this nature. Um, I think of how some of our people that feel, well, no one has done this for us. In some cases, well, two things. One, I've learned that you don't receive the information until it's time for you to receive it. So I
Mhm.
have to get that out before. But the other thing is, sometimes it's not always directly stated, and it's kind of inferred.
Mhm.
And I don't want to say it does a disservice, or I don't want to say that the receiver is not listening. I don't want to put the onus on anyone. What I would like to do is ask you, if that is the case, please give a direct statement of, if you were to tell one of our collective folks or give advice or any suggestions of them either doing something like what we're doing or adjacent, what would be a direct piece of advice that you would tell them to get whatever?
No, I think I would ask them a question. And again, for me, I say food is like it breaks down barriers. But for me, I would like let's just have a meal. You want me to cook for you, and that's from my grandmother. She was like, you can't really get get people to understand or open up if they're hungry. And hungry was this metaphor. It was a huge metaphor for if they're spiritually hungry, if they're socially hungry, if they are physically hungry. You have to feed the individual. But I would ask that person a question, and I would ask them, what is the future that you want to see? And I would open up with just saying, hey, ruminate over that, let's have a conversation. What future do you want to see? And I'm saying collectively, because you are going to be one small speck in and just a pebble of sand in this huge universe. And how do you want that universe to look? And what's your role in shaping that universe? And so, when I'm in the classroom, I'm always initially my students are like, Dr. E, you are always asking these questions. I'm like, but that is how we learn, by
Mhm.
asking questions. And I'm like, and I'm placing that to them. And then from there, based on that answer, I'm like, well, if you want, and we're all self-preservationists. We all want to do what's going to be, best for us, for our family. We want to survive. I'm like, but if survival, if that is the thing that you want to survive, and whatever that means broadly, survive financially, survive socially, survive in your physical health, what are you going to do to make that happen? How are you going to be intentional? And does that not warrant that you go back to the collective that you are a part of, either biologically, tangentially, whatever that looks like, and that you impart some kind of teaching to make sure that survivability is an option. And I would just ask them to start to think about what that looks like for them in those areas, and say it's okay to have accomplished a great deal of things, and that is wonderful. Accomplishments, they don't hurt. It's not a sin. It's not a bad thing. You can be accomplished, but you can also take those accomplishments and say, you know what? Somebody opened the way for me to get here. And can I just do my part, whether it is just a kind word or whether it is a kind word of correction, because sometimes we need correction, or it's a kind word of inspiration, and to say, just go back and have those conversations. It could be as simple as taking somebody to, get a cup of coffee and say, brother, let me talk to you for a second. And what do you want for yourself? And so I would say for us not to be afraid to have those conversations. We can be both accomplished, but we can be on, boots on the ground. And when I said that, that song came to mind. But we can be accomplished, but we can also do our part, because we have to think about all that we have survived. We have to think about what we're facing, and to think about what we want our generations. And when I say our generations, those folks who belong to us, whether they're children, whether they're nieces and nephews, whether they're grandkids, what do we want for them? What do we want that future to look like for them? And we have to have, these very real conversations where we take where we put our the letters before and behind our name aside, and just be real with people. And that's what I would say, like, it's okay. Yes,
Mhm.
I am cheering for everybody. It's, get that, whatever that is for you. But then, just be mindful of either what you had to go through, or what your parents had to go through, or your grandparents, or the generations before them, just to give you a seat at that table, because it didn't come for free.
Right. It was not for free. I
Hmm.
so I have to say I totally appreciate your time and the wonderful thought out answers.
I appreciate being here. I feel like we could just talk and talk and talk and talk, because there's so much to unpack, and I always enjoy my time with you, because you, like you said, you have been a friend to Texas folk life, um, and you are just an inspiration to me when I see all that you are doing, and then the knowledge that you're sharing, because I'm like, I can just be. I was like, you know what? Brother Lamont said this. Let me look this up. Let me Google it. And it becomes, something for me to think about. And as I'm doing my part in having these conversations with these folks that are coming behind me, you know, you're influencing me to say, hey, you can look at this in a very different way. Because some folks were like, well, yeah, I like this, but I don't know how it fits into my studies. And there's just it's not a one size fits all. And I'm like, you make it your own. Make it your own. And so I'm always thankful, that you continue to inspire me, and you just do the thing for folks that look like us, and for those that don't look like us, because I see the breadth, I see your reach, and for me that's like, okay, you know I see you doing it.
Wow, thank you. I did not expect that. I appreciate it too. Thank you. Well, where could the good people find you, your books, your writings? And again, thank you. I don't want to write that off. Thank you. But this is about you right now. Where can they where can they find any books, any writings, and anything from you?
Well, that's a good question. You can always reach out to me at either my personal email, Elisha or Oliver at gmail.com, or either at, Texas Folklife at Oliver at Texas Folklife, and .org. And some of my writings are out there. You can download them for free. And if there's something that you're interested in, and I've shared this with you, I have at least 2 decades of, and I again am aging myself, 2 decades of hard drives and flash drives of papers and research. And I'm just like, look, whatever I have, you, I am more than welcome. It is not mine solely, because if it can help you, or if it can, bring about a different thought or a different way to look at it, I am more than welcome to. I want to share it with you. So just reach out to me, and it may take me some time, but I will look through all of those, and just pull the papers, because there's the biological side of things. There's the sociocultural. There's the folklore with the storytelling and space and place, and just share that information out. So just feel free. Feel free.
Reach out, good folks. And if you're in Texas, is there anything they can apply for? How do they participate or get involved?
So in Texas, and one of the things that I am considering, because we do have those close relationships with our friends in Oklahoma and Louisiana. We've done some things in New Mexico as well, where we've opened up our programs at Texas Folk Life to community folk scholars. We are, it's no secret, we did not receive some of the funding that we were expecting, but the program is so instrumental to so many different people that we've looked at ways to self fund and come up with some other funds where we're opening that program up. And when that application, you can go to texasfolklife.org, and when that application is available, I would say, apply. Um, and we provide a stipend and an honorarium and provide some training. You have been one of our teachers in that program as well. And so, just apply. We have the apprenticeship program as well. So if you are a culture keeper, tradition bearer, we provide an honorarium, and we talked about, the transmission of knowledge throughout the generations. Well, this is one of the ways to make sure that that knowledge gets passed on through these apprenticeship programs. So, just log on again if there's a question, or if you see that there's a program and you think that you're a good fit, don't hesitate to reach out. If you are not in Texas, because we are part of this larger network, and you're in Arkansas or California, reach out, because I know those folks too, and they have programs. So again, you know, it kind of goes back to, I feel like it's my responsibility to be accessible, to make these resources accessible, because sometimes we're just not in the know. We don't know who to talk to, or we don't know exactly, you have this idea that you want to work on, but you don't know where to start. And so for me, I feel like, as a part of my dues, and this is just my language, as a part of my dues to my ancestors who, opened up those doors to, those folks that I've stood on their shoulders in many ways, that's a part of my giving back, and saying, look, these resources, I don't own them, but let me, I want to share them, and let me either make a call, or, walk you through an application process, whatever that looks like. I want to be able to do that.
That's the blues, but the good blues. Thank you so much. Good folks, you know what to do. Tune in next month. All of the information that you were given, uh, Dr. Elisha Oliver's email address, Texas Folklife's website, copy that down, check it out, and reach out. And remember, if you are the only one, be the person to document, collect, preserve, and conserve the stories of your peoples, because it's important. We're going to sign off on that one. Thank y'all, and thank you again.
Thank you.